All that in the next hour, and with us for the whole of the programme today are the Conservative MP and former Deputy Mayor of London, Kit Malthouse, and the Labour MP, Karin Smyth. Welcome to both of you.
Morning.
First of all today, the Prime Minister says that too few Muslim women living in the UK speak good English and that this is fuelling social isolation and, in turn, extremism. He's announced £20 million to fund English lessons and said that anyone on a spousal visa who fails to master the language could be asked to leave the UK.
It's essential that it does work because we want to build a more integrated, cohesive, one-nation society where everyone can make the most of their talents. You can't have a country of opportunity if some people can't speak the language. Now, in many cases, it's no fault of their own. It's because they've been put into a situation where they've been encouraged not to integrate, not to go out, not to learn the language. And that's not good enough. That needs to change in our country, and these proposals will make sure it does.
David Cameron there. We're joined now from Birmingham by Zubeda Limbada of the anti-extremism charity Connect Justice. Welcome to the Daily Politics. What do you think of David Cameron's suggestion that there is or could be a link between low levels of English amongst some Muslim women and the potential for extremism?
There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that, for example, if you look at the 700 cases of people who've gone to fight in Syria to join ISIS, that if their mothers had actually spoken English, that this would have stopped them from going into Syria. So the evidence is very poor in this particular case. If it's a security issue, the lack of evidence is very different from something that I see framed within the context of equalities, social mobility and integration. Those are two very different matters, and it's important that the Prime Minister does not conflate two very separate issues.
So when he says that if you don't speak English, I mean, this is what I put to you initially, but in a slightly different angle, you could be more susceptible to the extremist message that comes from Daesh. Do you think that a sense of isolation, if you don't speak English, could make some people susceptible to a radical message coming from outside the UK?
The fact that you don't speak a particular language and framing this in inequalities, which is what my point is, and within, if you look at, for example, Chinese communities, Polish communities, it then means that everyone is susceptible. That women, for example, that we engage with from the Muslim communities, one of their concerns when it comes to practical measures, when it comes to conversing with their children, is often around the fact that they don't understand the internet, they don't understand social media, and that's something that concerns them on the extremism aspect. There's a different matter when it comes to learning, being engaged in the economy, getting jobs, and being part of society. It's what David Cameron says about British values. Two different matters.
What about the issue of identity, though? Does that in any way sort of transcend towards messages of extremism and radicalisation for the very reasons you've said? If you're not having any other engagement beyond the home or beyond the mosque, you don't have access to the internet, in that sense, could you be radicalised in any way?
You could, I mean, there's no end to kind of, it could be this or it could be that. If you start to target a particular segment of the community, and then if you look at gender within that community, and if you then saying that they're further disempowered, by adding in punitive measures, by adding in the lens of security, surely that makes them slightly more susceptible to not listening to the message that the Prime Minister is trying to give as well.
Right, Kit Malthouse, as Zubeda say, actually it could have the opposite effect. It's more likely to radicalise people in this segment of society by taking this sort of language and these sorts of measures.
I find that quite a tenuous link, to be honest. I mean, I think we all agree that the foundation of integration is language acquisition, right? It sits at the base of every coherent society, that we have a common language so that everybody can participate and can absorb through the various routes, the media, all the rest of it, the influences that they need to turn into a productive member of society. And I think that's what the Prime Minister is trying to say. And if you look at what he actually wrote in the Times today, you know, it was very balanced and measured about this idea that there are particular segments of society who, because of culture or other practices, are marginalised, maybe because they're new arrivals to the country and don't have the language acquisition, and he wants to make it easier. It's that simple.
Right,
if that has a beneficial effect on radicalisation, then great, fantastic too.
Right, but as a byproduct, as you say. But was it helpful? Was it helpful to actually link the fact that there is a potential for extremism with low levels of English amongst Muslim women?
I think one of the things that's challenged everybody really around counter-extremism is this idea of certain sectors sections of the community, whoever they may be, feeling as if they're outside of the mainstream. And if one of the barriers to that is language, then surely we should do something to tackle it.
Zubeda?
Look at, if you're looking at a message that the government is giving of participation, I fully embrace that, and I think it's a strong message. When my government, when a male Prime Minister tells me that he's embraced equality, positive message. When the Cabinet has 20 men and only 10 women, when Parliament has 29% female participation, those are the bigger issues of ensuring equalities is a standard message that involves everyone, but it's heard by everyone and not alienating certain segments of the community with punitive measures.
Right, well, let's have a look at some of the measures. I mean, is it right then, in your mind, to be looking at not extending visas if somebody's been here for 2.5 years and they still don't speak English?
So I'd again like to ask David Cameron how would he be measuring someone's level of English in terms of the progress that they may have made in 2.5 years. As a child of immigrant parents, it's almost implying that integration over a longer term doesn't work. Investment has got to be more sustained. We've had around 20% cuts in ESOL language classes, and to suddenly reintroduce £20 million of investment for a particular targeted minority community simply on the basis of gender is not a thought-through measure. It's almost like that the government is running out of practical ideas around extremism and conflating this dangerously.
I mean, how would that work at Malthouse? People are going to be deported if they haven't passed a certain level of English?
I don't think there's any suggestion that people would necessarily be deported.
Well,
but I think what they're saying...
They wouldn't have their visa extended, so de facto they would be deported.
I think what they've said is that when people applied to extend their visa, that the level of English they'd attained during the period would be taken into account in the visa extension.
What level do you think it should be?
Well, I guess they would set a natural test. I mean, there is already, if you apply for a Tier 2 visa in this country, there already is an English test that establishes the level you need to come and work here, for instance. So I think these things can be assessed. And, of course, we do assess everybody's English in this country in school anyway by making people take exams.
I mean, Karin, surely it is a good thing to have extra money that is targeted, never mind that it was cut by the government originally in this particular area, but that is targeted to help people who could be marginalised learn and improve their English.
Well, I mean, I think your commentator makes some really valid points about equalities. I think it is clumsy. I grew up in an Irish family in this country in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't fashionable to be Irish growing up at that time, and I think that feeling of being made to feel other than being fully British is really problematic. So I think it's clumsy. I think it will be counterproductive for those communities. We need
what you think it would actually marginalise them further?
Well, I think when you feel that you're being attacked for who you are, then community people gather together, don't they? That you sense that you must look after yourselves, and I think that's really clumsy and unhelpful at this time. And as Kit has said, people required to pass an English test to come through. So I'm not really sure what the detail of this is.
I'm not quite
sure this is being characterised as an attack. This is £20 million and other measures which is being designed to help people participate more in society. I don't understand why it's attack.
When I was a councillor, targeting Muslim women particularly? Yes. I mean, is that the only segment in society of a group of people that can't speak good enough English in the government's mind?
I don't think it would be targeting Muslim in particular. And if you read the article, it talks about
this morning on the radio, the Prime
generally.
Minister said it would be targeted specifically at women, yes, and then specifically again at Muslim women.
Well, there may be that he identifies a particular problem. I mean, this comes out of a meeting that he held last week with leading Muslim women at Downing Street, where a number of them recounted to him the problems that they felt there were within the community of marginalisation and certain cultural practices which are not beneficial to the progress of women. So, of course, he's naturally going to talk about that.
Yes.
But when I was a councillor, we had a particular problem, for instance, with the Chinese community, with lots of elderly Chinese women who didn't participate in society fully because they lacked the language. That's something that could be addressed too.
Right, and Zubeda, on the cultural issue, I mean, there is a disconnect if there are communities where women are kept at home by their male partners, where they're not given access to the things that other women are given. Do you see that that isn't in accord with the British values that David Cameron believes?
I think, I mean, even kind of referring to Kit's point here about the Prime Minister meeting women in Downing Street. I'd actually first of all start off by urging David Cameron to come and speak to the women that we talk to on a daily basis. Some of the issues are very different from what the government seems to constantly impose and actually continues to marginalise. There's been a lot of, disenchantment with the government's way of messaging. It's very paternalistic, and it's constantly reinforcing this view that the Muslim community have got a problem that they need to sort out. There's no partnership element, and that's completely lacking as well.
Zubeda, thank you very much.